Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and today we are talking about communities, scaling online communities. And we're not talking about a particular app used to build communities that we're familiar with now, like Slack or Facebook groups or Discord. We're talking about the future of communities and what you're going to see coming out over the next decade. Now, this matters because the way we interact with each other right now, a lot of us are heavily active in Facebook groups professionally. That is a style of communicating in communities that is falling away, that's going to fade. And there is a new future coming. When you're done with this episode, you'll both be familiar with one attempt at going and bringing this future into the present. And you'll also have a better language to describe what you're seeing when you're looking at online communities. Now, joining us today, we have a creator of a new online community tool called Spiel. The creator's name is Murat. Welcome to Redbeard Radio.
Hi, thanks for having me, Brian.
Now, I'm really excited to talk to you because you are we're recording this in 2021, and you're not looking at 2022. You're looking at 2030 and trying to figure out what ought to be true in 2022 to make 2030 awesome. And one of the things you say, there's a few concepts that we need to go get on the same level at that some people may not know what these words mean. So before we really start our conversation, let's define a few things. First off, we got fractal localism. That's fractal localism. That's an idea that hugely important for the 2030s. And most listeners right now, they're like, I can sort of figure out what that means. But when you say fractal localism, what do you mean?
Basically, with the existing platforms that we're used to, Facebook, Twitter, and so on and so forth, we're used to the idea of very top-down moderation, where like it's the actual employees of those companies doing the moderation work, flagging things for inappropriate content and this and that. So that's the opposite of fractal localism, where you would actually be having smaller sections of the communities moderating themselves, moderation being done by people who are actually part of those smaller communities. And the fractal aspect is talking about how in the real world we have this concept of jurisdictions, where the small communities also make up larger communities, at which point you also have some, moderation layer or ruling layer or whatever. You're basically trying to apply this concept at every Zoom level and not just at the very zoomed out level, which is the ultimate top-down approach. So the easiest analogy would be like dictatorship versus bottom-up governance.
So let's give some examples here. The world I live in right now, in 2021, I'm a member of John Lee Dumas's Podcaster's Paradise. So I pay some money each month. He and his team decide what goes. They pay moderators, and that's all hosted on Facebook. So both there's the guy who's doing it, but then Facebook ultimately controls everything. I'm part of the Monkey Pod Grove, Greg Jenkins Monkey Pod Grove, for people who use Keep and Infusionsoft. I pay some money each month. He controls the group. He has his moderators, but it lives on Facebook. So Facebook owns everything ultimately. And then Greg has his team. And so what you're talking about with fractal localism is instead of having Facebook own everything and then have these other content creators like Greg Jenkins or John Lee Dumas live on top, you're talking about Greg and John owning their own things, but also being able to relate to each other in some way, right?
Yeah, so we actually have some very clear real-world examples, but we've gotten so used to them that we don't think about them in profound ways. Email is the biggest example. So email, I would say, is much closer to fractal localism than most of the other social tools that we use, because you're allowed to run your own email server and join the ecosystem and communicate with anyone else in there. And the way moderation works on email is it quite hidden to people, but spam mitigation and these sorts of things have evolved over time in ways where like all of these email server owners, all of the hosts are sharing allow lists, deny lists, like trying to help each other out with who they think are spammers, what kind of content should pass through, what kind of content should always be blocked. And after several decades, the system is mature to a point where it's not owned by anybody. It can be turned off by anybody, and anyone can join. And as long as you play by the rules, you're in. So, we've essentially solved it for, simple threaded communication, but email doesn't scale very well to all sorts of other community use cases that we have, which is why we keep flocking to things like Slack and whatnot. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, even Slack's selling point was that it's trying to replace email for companies. So we have a lot of proven concepts to work with that we're forgetting about. And I'm just trying to bring back those ideas and create a piece of software that tries to demonstrate these so that we have a starting point. And even if Spiel isn't the one that takes over the world, at least it gets the word out there and proves to people that, this isn't hopeless. It just needs to start somewhere, and hopefully it grows to a larger scale. The fact that email actually achieved world domination is an incredible feat of achievement, because it's not easy to get social scalability. Like, technical scalability is one thing, but having buy-in from everybody, that's the hard part. So
Consensus. Yeah. There's an
yeah,
episode on Redbeard Radio, which you can catch at redbeard.am, folks, where I talk with John Robb about consensus reality and how we need a new consensus reality. And Murat, part of the consensus you're talking about here is you have this concept of moving away from ad-supported apps. You talk about avoiding ads and having other ways to fund communities. I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
yeah, absolutely. So just a bit of background. I've been running a stock market related community site for the past like 7 years or so, and it's grown to maybe like 40,000 or more people.
Mm-hmm.
And moderation has been the absolute bane of my existence. And
Yeah.
especially when there's money on the line, it's just bickering and fights all day long with all the incentives not lining up.
Mm-hmm.
So the value is obviously in the community. Moderators essentially create a lot of the value by steering culture. It is almost like a full-time job. And on most communities on the internet, it's done by volunteers. Same goes for stuff like Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia could also be thought of like a community, and all the editors that are constantly arguing in the back pages and
Mm-hmm.
trying to find consensus. It's such difficult and valuable work that it should be compensated, and it often is. It's not just about the people who build the tech. We've all sort of like gotten addicted to ads. Like, I mean, especially once you start with ads as monetization, you can't really go back on that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can't tell the Twitter execs to be like, hey, just drop your entire income stream and find something else. So it's really important to start without ads. My hypothesis is that if the whole moderator compensation thing is built into the system from day one, then the incentives start lining up where more people are encouraged to be moderators that are doing a good job in people's eyes who are paying them. The value that's being created in the community is captured by the people who are helping with it the most. Hopefully that would also mitigate the issues around incentive structures that are caused by ads, where companies try to steal your attention at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is an issue with online journalism and all those things as well, where it's not that like journalists are in bad faith. It's just that incentives are lined up such that the journalists who don't create outrageous titles are just not going to do that well, Yeah. So the idea is to see what happens when incentives are different.
Well, so let's give a concrete example here of what the future might look like. Right now, I'm a member of Greg Jenkins' Monkey Pod Grove. So I pay him, and then I pay Facebook with my attention, right? Because they're constantly serving me ads, and they're taking my data about what I pay attention to, where I click, whatever else. So in the future, we're saying maybe Monkey Pod Grove will be hosted somewhere else, and then there might still be a fee to go participate, but then maybe there would be other moderators in the community, not staff people on Greg's team, where maybe I, as a community member who pays in, could go vote in some fashion, like maybe each month award a token to someone who I thought was really amazing that month. And then the top 3 token receivers each month could go get part of a bonus. Let's say 20% of what I pay in to the group gets awarded to the top community members who have supported the conversation. And that might look like moderating in some communities. It might look like offering the best help in other communities.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think there's like a lot of space to experiment with models about who pays for what.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I would love to explore is sort of like the concept of buying the group around. So let's say that you have a community of 300 people that's centered around some shared hobby that all these users care a lot about. And the moderators are, spending a lot of time maintaining this. they might one day go out and say, okay, we're actually going to need a total of $300 a month to keep this going. And it doesn't matter who pitches in, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like every user has to pay $5 a month. It's like, as long as you guys pull this money, we're going to keep this going. And so someone who can, afford a bit more than the others might pay up. And the fact that this is public is, also just like bringing a lot of our social instincts and just like feeling good because you just did everyone a favor.
Mm-hmm.
Those sorts of models could be interesting. And the other thing is like we'll probably get into it more, but with Spiel, a big focus is sort of like the democratic consensus aspect on channel rules and moderation. And the
Mm-hmm.
same thing can also apply to monetization. So each channel could technically configure their own rules about how the money is distributed among owners, moderators, and all that stuff.
So let's give a specific example there. You're saying that one channel might say everyone who participates in this channel has to pay $5 a month and no
Mm-hmm.
one gets compensation. All goes to the owner of the group. And then another
Mm-hmm.
channel might say you can pay what you want. If you do decide to contribute, then you get tokens in exchange for however much you contributed. 1 token per dollar you contributed this month. And you get a vote on who the most useful people are. And the 3 most useful people are going to get a share of the cash that's donated by the people. They're 50% of the payout. It goes to the people who contribute. And you could have these living simultaneously in the similar group. And you could say, well, I want to go to the free group or the $5 for everybody, or I want to go to the meritocracy group. And then you could experiment and you could see what creates the best content around a particular area.
Exactly. This has to become more of a pattern where rules are applied locally to the
Yeah.
community where those specific rules matter, as opposed to this whole like capture the entire world under one rule set thing that people keep trying to do, like with Instagram just being like, nipples are not allowed worldwide. It's like, okay, but that doesn't make sense in some cultures. It makes sense in others, and but you just can't capture everybody under one rule set.
Mm-hmm.
And this applies to every aspect: monetization, moderation.
I want to read something here from Joe Norman. He's on Twitter at Normonics, and he teaches a class on applied complexity. It's basically a semester-long class. But let me read here what Joe Norman said about localism. He says, complexity foundations of localism. Number 1, complex patterns form from local interactions among components, typically following simple rules, which in more plain speech means you can have something very simple like my local community dog walking group. And then you might also have a group that is for beekeepers. But those groups might interact in ways that you can't predict and that we can't force. And that comes to his second point, Norman's second point. Central control rapidly swamped in face of complexity, stifling organic adaptation. Facebook can't change, right? Facebook can't respond well. And we've seen as they've tried to respond to all kinds of threats, real and imagined, and they make mistakes, big mistakes, long-term mistakes. And because there's only one Facebook, everybody is affected. But with the app you're working on with Spiel, I might make a huge mistake with my local dog walking group, but that doesn't have to mean that the contagion expands to the beekeeping group and also takes that group out.
Exactly. The experimentation has to be localized and it has to be parallel. So there has to be multiple dog walker groups trying to find the best rule set for making these work well. And the ones that do better will survive more, and everybody else will copy their way of doing stuff.
This brings us to Joe's third point. He says his third thing is behavioral independence yields thin tails in macro, which is to say that if you can do what you're going to do and I can do what I'm going to do, then our chances of having a cataclysm that takes out the whole system go down. Because you're going to have different opinions about how to run your local dog walking group. And I'm going to have different opinions about my local dog walking group. And we don't have to be identical. We can be diverse. And the system has to allow that, which is part of what your app does that Facebook does not. Facebook does not allow diversity, right? You can't divert from, and it's dangerous if you divert depending on what culture you're in between Facebook. And then we have some cultures in the world where if you say certain things in public, it's very dangerous. And so with Spiel and other tools that might have in some communities some layer or complete anonymity or geographic anonymity, like I can imagine being part of a beekeeper group where it's concealed where I'm actually located. And maybe now we're getting sort of silly here, but there's some country where beekeeping is illegal. Well, that person can join too under a pseudonym. And now they can be part of our community without threat of legal reprisal.
Right. Just about the whole messing everything up with uh, making a mistake and changing the rules when it's top down, like that was one of my biggest motivations in starting this project, because with my existing community, I am the top down moderator, right?
Yeah.
And I'm constantly overwhelmed with the responsibility, because when the users are complaining about something going wrong, it's on me to make a rule change and fix it. But I cannot predict all the second order effects that I'm going to cause with major changes to how things work on the site. So I'm often paralyzed, and I end up not doing anything, because it's easier to mess something up that's complex when you're doing things top down than to fix it.
And it's not just you. It's not
Yeah.
just you. It's any single organization, any single entity. The Catholic Church cannot help but make huge mistakes, as when acting as the United States government cannot help but make huge mistakes. It's impossible not to. It doesn't matter how good intentioned the people are operating the machinery of huge systems.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about curated feeds. One of the things about Spiel that you have on your product roadmap is this curated feeds idea. And this is really interesting because I would love to know, and let's say I live near Seattle, I'd love to see the best content from around Seattle, sort of like on Reddit where they have what's rising or what's trending. I'd love to see that
Mm-hmm.
across a variety of groups. Now, maybe I'm really active in the beekeeping and the dog walking groups, but I want to see, if something gets really popular over there in the growing your own green beans group or the how to make your own shoes group, whatever, I'd like to hear about it. And so your curated feeds idea is going to let me experience other groups that I'm adjacent to, but not involved in a way where I can experience it ad free. Can you tell us more about what that future is going to look like?
So, if you think about it, every feed algorithm, whether it's your Facebook or Twitter home screen, it's actually a search algorithm. But the idea is that we don't know how that search algorithm works. It's whatever the team at Twitter on that day has decided, and I'm sure they keep changing it year to year, and we don't even notice. And they're always tuning the algorithms for engagement, essentially, because all they care about is ad views. So the idea would be to simply open up these search algorithms to being more, I guess, verbose and transparent, and allow people to sort of like tune the search algorithms and be able to subscribe to other people's search algorithms as well. And they replace the concept of feeds. And there's a lot of creativity involved with those sorts of things. So as you said, you might be interested in the activity that's going on in your area. Someone else might be interested in the content that their friends are most interested in. There's all sorts of different ways of tapping into the network and finding what you're interested in. And there's a bit of work involved in discovering what those are and what the interesting feeds are. And once you find them, they should be very easy to share with a simple link, such that other people subscribe to those feeds that are made up from the search queries composed by other people. For example, on Twitter, which I use a lot, I would love to be able to create specific lists where these are the 15 people I care about the most. I want to check the top posts they've made this week, and then I want to see everything else or something. At the core of it, I think, is building an open, flexible search interface with a strong backend that works quickly, and letting people run with it.
And also, I think that adopting how other people look at things is one of the most interesting things here. We can imagine the future, which it'll be here soon, where a lot of people have augmented reality, either glasses or implants. And I might say that I would like any plant I look at for longer than a quarter of a second to populate with the name of the plant and its medicinal uses. And you might decide that you want, whenever you look at the sky and you look at a cloud for more than a quarter second, for the name of that kind of cloud and its elevation to populate in your field of view. And then, dear listener, you might say, I really like Murat's point of view today. I want to go see clouds. And the next day you might feel like, I want to see plants. You might change your mind based on your mood, what you're curious about. And we're eventually going to have curated reality feeds that will increasingly diverge from each other. But that's good, right? That I don't really want Facebook to decide how I should feel, or Twitter. That's not healthy ever, right? It's only healthy to the extent that it's making their advertisers money. And I do run ads on Facebook and on Twitter. So I'm the person this is benefiting, right? Because I know that I'm benefiting from how they make people anxious. So they want to buy stuff to deal with their anxiety. That's how ads work. But I want to be able to say, oh, I like how so-and-so, maybe, like, what about the Dalai Lama? I want to put on the Dalai Lama's augmented reality glasses and say, how does the Dalai Lama view things? If I want to just relax, or maybe I want to go put on Conor McGregor's, the MMA fighter, and say, I want to go see the world through the eyes of Conor McGregor for a little bit. And that's the augmented reality version. But when you talk about your curated feeds, it'll be, well, how do you want to feel today? And maybe Murat, maybe your app will say, how do you want to feel today? And you'll have 10 options about moods. And you click one, and then sort of like we have a like button on Facebook. Well, if someone tagged a particular data point as happy or sad or nostalgic or something much more specific like morose or lackluster, and you can completely modify your mood in terms of the information coming into your head.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you should be able to say stuff like, given these group of 20 people that I have marked as people I trust, show me the content that they've marked as wholesome or something.
Or even victories. If I want to go feel good, let's say I'm having a crappy day. Well, yeah, the 20 people I care about the most, if I said, I just want to hear about what's going well, and I then get to see their post, which they've self-tagged, but also the rest of people in their communities have tagged as being positive or sad. And then I can go have my feed and Spiel just show me the good news. I want to feel peppy. Like, I don't want to take in, I occasionally am on Twitter too early in the day before I've really done my productive work for the day. And I come across sad news, angry news, things I want to know, but not right now. I'm in my productive part of the day. I want to be supported and hear good things and hear about building. I want the builders channel. Maybe later in the day, I want the concerned citizen channel. But at the start of the day, I want the builder inspired. I want to hear Dennis Yu talking about how to do stuff on Facebook and content creation. I want to hear all these people going and talking about great stuff. I want to be inspired, inspiration. Well, it's sort of like a Pandora channel, isn't it? What you're building here. It's a Pandora channel, but for all information and among just people you care about or people you specifically choose. So it's live partially. Can you tell us a bit about what is live right now in Spiel? And for people who are curious about hearing more, where can they find you and how can they get involved in the project?
The project is currently up at beta.spiel.com. The reason it's beta is because I don't want to call it the production launch until the democratic governance aspect is proved. But I want to have it up and have people playing with it because the beta does implement all of the hierarchical decisions that I think are critical to having all of these ideas fall into place gracefully. The number one most important aspect is the hierarchical channel architecture, meaning unlike Slack or Discord, channels can have sub-channels to infinite depth, sort of like how file and folder structures work on our computers. Because one big advantage is that jurisdictions are an emergent feature with hierarchies. And just starting to play with the interface and making it fun and sort of friction-free is the number one priority. And you can find my contact info on the homepage at beta.spiel.com as well. And if anybody wants to help, I do intend to take the project open source in the next couple of months because the whole idea is to start going towards like a federated model where other people can run their own instances and join the same sort of chat universe from your own server. And there's a lot of work to do, but this is a starting point. And if you're interested, please do get in touch.
Wonderful. Now, if you want to go follow Murat on Twitter, it's Mayfair, Mayfer. And you can see more details there. The way to spell the website is beta.spiel.com, beta.spiel.com, to go ahead and take a look. And I would encourage you all to go take a look at that and think about, for all of your professional connections, all the groups that you're involved in that really matter in your life, what is it going to look like a decade from now when some of these concepts we've talked about, like rewarding creators and moderators, like fractal localism, like curated feeds, when that becomes normalized, and we talk about the crazy old days back when Facebook was around and you chose to get outraged in order to make other people money, which is what we're all doing today every day, what are your communities going to look like? What do you want them to look like? And how can you build for the future 10 years from now when this is completely normalized? That is, I think that's what we got to look at is where are we going from here? Facebook and Twitter, that ad revenue outrage model is leaving and something else is taking its place. Murat, thank you for working on building the next generation of things. And thank you for being on Redbeard Radio.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Brian. Hopefully that pushes the needle on at least some of the ideas, and we'll make this work in the next decade.